My name is Keisha Williams, and I've lived 35 years in this world as a black woman, a single mother, and a daughter of this community that I call home. It's not the safest place, and if I'm being honest, it's not the easiest place to live either. But it's where my roots are, and where I've learned to fight, to survive. I grew up in the church. Mama made sure of that. Sundays were for God, gospel music, and hope. But somewhere along the way, that hope started to feel distant. As I grew older, the world showed me its darker sides, and all the teachings about God's love felt hollow when faced with the harsh reality of being black in America. Living in this community has been a constant reminder that racism isn't just history. It's woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. Police brutality? We hear about it all the time, but it hits different when it's right here, on our streets, in our families. My son, Jamal, is only 10, but every time he steps outside, there's a part of me that worries. What if he doesn't come back? What if something happens? Those aren't just paranoid thoughts. They're real fears based on the news we watch, the neighbors we lose, the stories we live. I don't talk much about religion anymore. How can I? How do I reconcile a loving God with the world my people have endured for centuries? Every Sunday sermon about patience, forgiveness, and divine justice feels more like salt in a wound than a balm for the soul. My mama still prays for me. She prays for us all, really, but I've stopped believing a long time ago that prayers alone can change things. But little did I know, my beliefs, or the lack thereof, were about to be challenged in a way I never expected. Life, it seems, has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you least expect it. It was late, too late for me to be out, really, but I had to pick up some groceries after a long shift at the hospital. My feet ached. My body felt heavy, and all I could think about was getting home to Jamal. The streets were quiet, that eerie kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. I've always been careful, especially in this neighborhood where cops roll through like predators, waiting for the scent of weakness or defiance. As I pulled into a dimly lit intersection, I noticed flashing red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. My stomach dropped. Instinctively, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. A cop. I hadn't done anything wrong, but that never seems to matter. My heart pounded, each beat a reminder of stories I'd heard and people I'd known. Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, names whispered like warnings in my mind. My breath became shallow as the cruiser pulled up behind me, and a cold sweat crept over my skin. "Stay calm," I whispered to myself. "Just stay calm." The officer, a large white man, swaggered up to my window. His face was hard, and I recognized him immediately. Sergeant Roberts, the same cop who'd been known around town for targeting people like me. Black folks. He looked at me like I was less than human, like I didn't belong here, even though this was my home. "You know why I pulled you over?" His voice was rough, dripping with authority. "No, sir," I replied, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay composed. "Step out of the car," he demanded, his tone colder than before. I hesitated for a moment, and that was all it took for the tension to snap. He yanked the door open, grabbing my arm, pulling me out like I was a criminal. I protested, panicked now, trying to tell him I hadn't done anything wrong, but he wasn't listening. He never would. His grip was strong, too strong. My chest tightened, and suddenly it felt like the world was spinning. My heart raced, my breath became ragged, and before I knew it, the pain shot through my chest like a knife. Everything went black. I remember falling, but it felt more like floating, like I was being pulled away from everything, away from my son, my life, my world. For a few moments, I was dead. The darkness wrapped around me, but it wasn't the cold, terrifying black void I expected. It was quiet, peaceful even, for a few seconds or maybe longer. It's hard to tell in that space. I felt nothing. No pain, no fear. just stillness. Then, slowly, I began to sense something pulling me, like a gentle current guiding me toward a light. It wasn't the harsh glare of a hospital lamp or the violent flash of red and blue police lights. No, this light was soft, warm, like the rising sun breaking through after a stormy night. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that my body was still lying on the cold asphalt, fighting for life. But this light was different. It felt alive, almost like it was calling me. The pain in my chest faded into the background, and I realized I was no longer in my body. I was floating, but in a way that felt natural, as if gravity had loosened its grip and I was free to drift. I looked down and saw my own body lying on the street, Robert standing over me, his face twisted in some mix of confusion and panic. The paramedics had arrived, frantically working on me, their voices muffled, distant. I could see their hands on my chest, pushing, trying to force life back into me. But I felt none of it. I was somewhere else entirely now. It was then that I noticed the light had grown stronger, surrounding me. I didn't walk toward it. I was pulled, gently but steadily, until I found myself standing in a place that felt familiar and strange all at once. It wasn't a physical place, but it felt real. The air was warm, and there was this deep sense of peace, the kind of peace I hadn't known in a long time, maybe ever. For the first time in years, the weight of fear, anger, and exhaustion I'd carried my entire life had lifted. It was just gone. And then, there he was. Jesus. I knew it was him, though I had never imagined seeing him like this. He wasn't the solemn figure I'd seen in pictures growing up in my mama's house. There was something about him that radiated love, something unshakably calm and powerful. But my heart wasn't calm. The moment I saw him, all the questions I had buried for so long, all the pain, rushed to the surface. As I stood there, face to face with Jesus, the peace around me started to feel like a distant memory. All I could think about was the life I'd just been torn from, the injustice, the violence, the endless struggle of being black in America. My heart surged with questions, with anger. I had never been one for soft prayers or turning the other cheek, and now, standing before the man that so many claimed to worship, I couldn't hold back. The words poured out before I even had time to second-guess them. "How?" I asked, my voice trembling, both with fear and fury. "How can you let this happen? How can you watch as we suffer, generation after generation, while people like that cop walk free, full of hate, full of power? Where is justice? Where is mercy?" Jesus looked at me, his eyes gentle but unwavering, and the calm he exuded only made my anger grow. This wasn't fair. Nothing about this world was fair. And now, here I was, dead, or close enough to it, because of the very thing that had been killing my people for centuries. My fists clenched, my voice rising. "Do you even see us? Do you hear us when we cry out? Because I don't think you do. If you did, if you really loved us, how could you let us suffer like this? How could you let them tear our families apart, strip away our dignity, make us fear for our children every time they step out of the house?" I didn't hold back, not even in the presence of Jesus. All the years of doubt, all the questions I had about faith, about the world, about why my people had to bear the weight of so much pain, it all came rushing to the surface. I expected him to say something, to explain, to justify, to defend this broken world. But instead, he listened. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, filled with a deep sadness I didn't expect. "Keisha," he said, softly, "I have seen your pain. I have felt the cries of your people, and I have carried that weight with you. The suffering you see in this world, racism, hatred, violence, it is not what I intended for my children. It is the darkness of human hearts, a darkness I came to overcome." I shook my head. "Then why? Why does it still happen? Why does it feel like you're not even there?" "There are things in this world that break my heart too," he said. "I never promised that there wouldn't be suffering, but I promised that one day it would all be made right. The pain you feel is not in vain. It will not last forever. I am the light in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. His words hit me hard, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. So what are we supposed to do? Just wait? Just pray while our brothers and sisters die in the streets? While our sons grow up fearing for their lives? Jesus stepped closer, and the warmth of his presence felt like a balm against my anger. No, Keisha, you are not called to wait in silence. You are called to stand, to fight against the darkness with love, with truth, with justice. But know that this battle is not just yours. I am with you in every step, and there will come a day when all things will be set right. His words hung in the air, heavy with a kind of meaning I hadn't expected. But even in the presence of Jesus, my heart still felt tangled in knots of doubt and pain. It was like I wanted to believe him, but the weight of the world I knew kept dragging me back down. I looked into his eyes that seemed to hold all the love and sorrow of the world, and I pressed him further. But why? Why should we trust that things will get better? My people have been suffering for centuries, and every generation thinks it'll get better, but it doesn't. How can I believe that this so-called plan of yours is ever going to end the suffering we face? Jesus' expression softened even more. I could feel a kind of deep, infinite patience coming from him, as if he had all the time in the world to sit with me in this place of confusion, anger, and pain. You're right, Keisha, he said quietly. Your people have suffered, and there has been great evil in this world. Evil that has caused unimaginable pain. But know this, I did not create that evil. I did not create the hate that fills the hearts of men like the one who hurt you tonight. That darkness is the result of human choices, choices to turn away from love. I wanted to interrupt, to argue, but he held up a hand, gentle but firm, and continued. Keisha, I came into this world to be a light in that darkness, to show a different way. My life, my death, my resurrection, they were all meant to give humanity the power to overcome that darkness. But the world is still broken because people are still free to choose, and many choose to stay in the dark. But even in that darkness, I am working. Every act of love, every moment of justice, every time someone stands up for what is right, they are part of my plan. I stared at him, my thoughts spinning. It wasn't the answer I wanted. It felt too abstract, too distant from the reality of bullets, police batons, and jail cells. I sighed, rubbing my temples, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. So, what? We just have to endure all this pain because it's part of some grand plan? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice again. We're supposed to just trust that somehow it'll all work out? Jesus stepped closer, and I felt a wave of warmth radiating from him. No, Keisha, you are not meant to suffer without hope. The pain of this world is real, and I do not take it lightly. But know that it will not last forever. The darkness will not win. There will come a time when I will return, and all things will be made new. Every tear will be wiped away, and every wrong will be made right. There was something in the way he said it, in the absolute certainty of his voice, that made me pause. For a moment, I glimpsed the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there was a future where the world wasn't so broken, where my son, Jamal, wouldn't have to grow up with the same fear I'd lived with all my life. But it still felt so far away. Jesus seemed to sense my doubt, and he gently placed his hand on my shoulder. I know it's hard to believe, Keisha, but you are part of that plan. Your voice, your strength, your love, they are all part of how the world changes. You are not alone in this. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years, hope. As I stood there, struggling to comprehend everything he had just said, Jesus lifted his hand, and suddenly, the peaceful surroundings around us shifted. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back, and I found myself standing in a different place entirely. But this wasn't the harsh world I knew. The world of systemic racism, police brutality, and generational trauma. This place was beautiful. It was a city, but not like any city I'd ever seen before. The buildings were tall and gleaming, reflecting the light of a warm sun. The streets were filled with people, black, white, brown. all walking together, smiling, laughing, without fear, without anger. There was no tension in the air, no sense of division or threat. It was a world where people simply existed together, not defined by their skin, their histories, or the violence that had once shaped their lives. I watched in awe as children played freely in the streets, their laughter echoing through the air. Families sat together in parks, talking, eating, enjoying each other's company, without a trace of the worry that had plagued my own life for as long as I could remember. There were no sirens blaring, no police patrolling with suspicion in their eyes. It was a world where love and peace reigned, where justice had already been served. I turned to Jesus, my voice trembling with disbelief. Is this real? Is this what the future could be? This is what I promised, Keisha, he said softly, standing beside me. This is the world I am working toward. A world where the sins of the past are no longer chains on the present, where all people can live freely, without fear, without hate. But how? How can this be possible? How do we get from where we are now to this? I asked, my voice full of both wonder and doubt. The path is not easy, Jesus admitted, but this is the destiny I have for the world. My return will bring this justice. But until then, it is people like you, like those who fight for love and truth, who will lay the foundation for this future. The darkness will try to stop it, but it cannot win. This future is assured. I stared at the vision in front of me, trying to wrap my mind around it. A world without fear, without injustice. A world where my son, and all children, could grow up without the weight of centuries of oppression on their shoulders. It felt too good to be true, but standing here, with Jesus, I felt a flicker of belief that maybe, just maybe, this world wasn't as far away as it seemed. What about the ones who've caused all the pain? I asked, thinking about Sergeant Roberts, about the systems and people that had inflicted so much harm. Will they ever face justice? Jesus' expression grew serious, but still calm. All who have caused harm, all who have embraced the darkness, will face judgment. No one escapes justice, Keisha. But know this, my justice is not about revenge. It is about restoration, healing what has been broken. Those who continue to reject love will face the consequences of their choices, but I desire that all would turn to the light. I felt a deep sense of relief hearing those words. For so long, I had carried the weight of wanting justice, of needing to see the people who had harmed my community held accountable. But standing here, in the light of this future, I began to understand that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making things right, about healing the deep wounds that had been left on our hearts and our world. This future, Jesus said, turning to me with a gentle smile, is not just for you. It's for your son, for his children, for every generation that comes after. The work you do now, the love you show, will bring this world closer. Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at the peaceful city once more. For the first time in my life, I felt that there was a future worth fighting for. A future where all the pain, all the suffering would finally make sense. As I stood there, taking in the vision of a world healed from the wounds of hate and oppression, something inside me shifted. It was like a dam had broken, and the years of anger, disbelief, and sorrow that I had carried with me were slowly being washed away. The weight I didn't even realize I was bearing began to lift, replaced by a warmth that felt unfamiliar, hope. I had lived so long without it that the sensation was almost foreign to me. I turned to Jesus, my voice quieter now, softer. I never thought I'd see something like this, I admitted. I stopped believing a long time ago. My mama, she always said there was hope in you, but I just couldn't see it. Jesus smiled gently, his eyes filled with understanding. You've carried so much, Keisha. The world has been hard on you, on your people. It's understandable that your heart would grow heavy, that your faith would waver. But know this, I have never left your side. Even in your darkest moments, I was there, carrying you when you felt too tired to walk. Tears stung my eyes. His words pierced me deeply, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to truly feel the grief I had pushed aside. The pain of living in a world that seemed indifferent to the struggles of Black people. I thought of my son, Jamal, and the future I so desperately wanted for him. A future where he wouldn't have to live in fear. Could it really be possible? I don't know if I can trust this, I whispered, almost ashamed of my doubt, even as I stood in the presence of Jesus himself. He didn't flinch. It's okay to have doubts, Keisha. Faith is not about never questioning. It's about choosing to trust even when you don't have all the answers. You are not alone in your pain, and you don't have to carry it by yourself anymore. I nodded slowly, my heart wrestling with the remnants of my skepticism and my deeply ingrained need to protect myself from disappointment. But here, in this place of light and peace, something inside me softened. The bitterness that had long settled in my soul began to dissolve. Maybe it was because I was standing in the presence of someone, so deeply good that I couldn't help but believe. I don't know what to do, I confessed. I've spent so long being angry, so long feeling like everything was against me. I don't know how to let that go. Jesus stepped closer, and the warmth of his presence washed over me like sunlight breaking through a storm. You don't have to do it all at once. Healing takes time, but you've already taken the first step. You've opened your heart, and that's enough for now. His words felt like a balm, soothing the wounds I hadn't even realized were still raw. I closed my eyes, letting the peace of this moment sink in. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe deeply again, like the tightness in my chest was finally loosening. I didn't have to have all the answers right now. I didn't have to fix everything at once. But I knew one thing. I wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I looked at Jesus, my voice steadier now, though still trembling with emotion. I want to believe. I want to believe in this future you've shown me, in the love you're offering. I don't know how to get there, but I'm willing to try. Jesus' smile widened, and I could feel his joy. That's all I ask, Keisha. I am with you always. In that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't like the dramatic conversions I'd heard about in church. It wasn't like a lightning bolt or a thunderous revelation. It was quiet, gentle, but powerful. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I felt a peace I hadn't known before. I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. I had someone to walk with me, someone who understood my pain and promised a future where that pain would no longer exist. And with that, I felt a new sense of purpose starting to take root in my heart. My life wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about carrying this light back with me into the world. Just as I was beginning to grasp the enormity of the peace and purpose I had found in that moment, the world around me began to change again. The warm light, the vision of the future, even Jesus himself, it all started to fade, like a dream slipping away in the early hours of the morning. I could feel myself being pulled back toward the world I had come from, the world that just moments ago I thought I had left behind forever. A sudden, sharp pain surged through my chest. It was the kind of pain that reminded me I wasn't in that place of light and peace anymore. I was back in my body, back in the street, surrounded by chaos. The world around me was a blur of noise and movement. I could hear voices, muffled at first but growing clearer. Someone was shouting instructions. Paramedics, maybe. I could feel the pressure on my chest, the hands pushing down, trying to restart the life that had been slipping away from me. The pain was unbearable, but this time, it didn't scare me. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew what was waiting for me beyond this life. I had seen it, felt it. The peace, the light, the promise of something better. It was real. But for now, I was being pulled back into this broken world, and strangely, I was okay with it. I had a reason to be here now, a purpose. The voices became clearer. "She's back," someone shouted, relief evident in their tone. I gasped for air, my lungs burning as I took in my first breath back in the world of the living. My chest ached, and every muscle in my body screamed in pain, but I was alive. I blinked, trying to focus. The bright lights of the ambulance, the concerned faces of the paramedics leaning over me, it was all so jarring after the serenity I had just experienced. My body felt heavy, weak, like it wasn't quite mine yet. I could hear the paramedics talking to each other, their relief palpable, but I was too exhausted to respond. I could only lie there, processing what had just happened. As they loaded me into the ambulance, my mind drifted back to what I had seen, to the conversation I had with Jesus. It felt so far away now, like a memory from another life. But it was real. I knew it was real. The peace, the love, the promise of justice. Those things were as real as the pain in my chest and the sound of the ambulance siren wailing in my ears. A paramedic leaned over me, his voice gentle. "You're okay, ma'am. You're going to be all right. Just stay with us, all right?" I nodded weakly, though I knew I wasn't the same person who had been pulled out of that car by Sergeant Roberts. I had been changed in those few minutes when my heart had stopped beating. I didn't know how to explain it, not even to myself yet, but I knew that the world I had just come back to wasn't the same anymore, because I wasn't the same anymore. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, I closed my eyes, holding on to the warmth and peace of that other place as tightly as I could. I knew that things wouldn't be easy from here. The world I had come back to was still full of hate, of violence, of injustice. But now, I had something I hadn't had before. Hope. Hope that the world could change. Hope that my life had a purpose beyond survival. Hope that one day, everything I had seen in that vision of the future would become reality. The days after I returned from the dead felt like a blur, and yet, everything was sharper, more vivid than before. Physically, I was weak. My body was healing, and the doctors kept telling me how lucky I was to be alive. But it wasn't luck that had brought me back. I knew that now. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still see the vision of that perfect world, still feel the presence of Jesus, and hear his words echoing in my soul. "You are not alone in this." Back in the community, things hadn't changed much. The streets still buzzed with the same tension, the same fear that lingered in the air, especially for people like me. The news was filled with the same stories. Another black man shot by police, another family torn apart by the system. But now, everything felt different to me, because I had changed. It wasn't long before people in my neighborhood started asking questions. They'd heard about what happened, that I'd been dead, that I'd come back. Word gets around fast, especially in a close-knit community like ours. Some came out of curiosity, others with disbelief. "I heard you saw something," they'd say, their eyes searching mine for answers, for a glimpse of whatever I had experienced. At first, I wasn't sure how to tell them. How do you explain something so profound, something that not even I had fully processed yet? But then I remembered what Jesus had told me, that I had a purpose, that my voice, my story, was part of the change that this world so desperately needed. And so, I started talking. I told them about the light, about the peace, and about the vision of a world where love and justice triumphed over hate and fear. I told them about my encounter with Jesus, how he had listened to my anger, my pain, and how he had promised that the suffering of our people would not last forever. I spoke of the future he showed me, a future where we didn't have to be afraid anymore, where our children could grow up free from the burdens we had carried for so long. At first, some of them looked at me like I was crazy, and I get it. If someone had told me this a month ago, I probably would have reacted the same way. But then something amazing happened. People started listening, really listening. They didn't just want to hear about the peace and the light. They wanted to know how I had found hope in a world that seemed determined to strip it away from us. It wasn't easy. Some people pushed back hard. "How can you say that after everything we've been through?" One man asked me angrily after I shared my story at a community meeting. "How can you believe in a God who lets this happen to us?" I looked him in the eye, feeling the weight of his question. "I don't have all the answers," I said honestly, "but I know this. The world we live in now isn't the end of the story. I've seen what's waiting for us, and I believe that change is possible. Not just in the future, but right here, right now. And it starts with us." It wasn't an instant transformation. People didn't just drop their doubts and fears overnight. But slowly, something began to shift. People started coming to me, asking more questions, wanting to hear more about the hope I had found. And I kept talking, kept sharing the message that Jesus had given me. That love is stronger than hate, that justice will come, and that we are part of making that change happen. There were moments of resistance, of course. The old anger and doubt still flared up inside me at times. There were days when I felt like my voice was too small, that I couldn't make a difference. But then I would think of that vision, of the children playing in the streets without fear, of the peace that had washed over me, and I would keep going. As the weeks turned into months, I settled back into life, but it wasn't the same life I had known before. Everything felt different now. There was a fire inside me, a purpose I had never felt so clearly. Every time I looked at Jamal, my son, I thought about the future I had seen, the world where he could grow up free from the fear that had shaped my own life. That vision gave me the strength to keep pushing forward, even when the weight of the present reality seemed overwhelming. People in the community continued to come to me, some seeking comfort, others seeking understanding. My story spread beyond just the neighborhood. I was invited to speak at churches, community centers, and even schools. The message was always the same. That hope, real hope, wasn't just about waiting for things to get better someday. It was about acting in love and justice right here, right now. Jesus had shown me that the work we do today is part of the future we're building, and I believed that with everything in me. Of course, not everyone was ready to believe. There were still people who looked at me with skepticism, who doubted the change I had experienced, who doubted that anything could ever truly change. I understood that. I had lived in that space of doubt for most of my life. But now, standing on the other side, I knew something they didn't. That change wasn't just possible, it was promised. The future wasn't something distant and unreachable. It was something we were shaping with every act of kindness, every moment of resistance against the hatred and division that tried to tear us apart. I had seen it. I had felt it in the presence of Jesus, and I had been given a glimpse of what the world could be. And I wasn't going to let that vision go. There were still hard days, days when the weight of the world felt like too much to bear. When news of yet another instance of police violence hit, it was hard not to slip back into that old anger, that old despair. But now, I carried something with me that I hadn't had before: hope. And it wasn't just for me. It was for my son, for my community, for everyone who had been told that the world would never change. One night, as I sat with Jamal at the kitchen table helping him with his homework, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. He looked up at me, his face full of the kind of innocence only a child can have, and I smiled. "Mama," he asked, "why do you talk to all those people? Why do they listen to you?" I thought about that for a moment, trying to find the right words. "Because, baby, they're looking for something that makes them feel like everything's going to be okay. And I think I've found that." He looked at me with those big eyes, nodding slowly as if he understood. Maybe he did, in a way that only a child can. As I tucked him into bed that night, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "You're going to grow up in a world that's better than the one I did. I promise." He looked up at me, sleepy but smiling. "I believe you, Mama." In that moment, I knew that everything I had been through, everything I had seen and felt, was leading me to this moment of hope, of promise, of faith in something bigger than myself. The future was uncertain, but one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't alone in this anymore. And because of that, I could face whatever came next with courage, with strength, and with the unshakable belief that love would win in the end. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and check out this next story. It's really emotional,